Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at the natal chart of Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston passed away 10 years ago. And for those of you who are younger than maybe 30 or even 35, you might not fully know how massive her success was during her heyday. Because sometimes people learn about a person when they're having a lot of problems and they're not, at the height of their career anymore. And even like somebody like Michael Jackson that continued to have, chart singles, but was not at that same level that he was years earlier. Of course, younger people may know about him and think, oh, yeah, he's a really famous person, but they don't have the full grasp of the power that these people wielded in their heyday. And same with Madonna. She still is doing her thing, but she was really one of the big hitters. Prince was more the first half of the 80s. That was his heyday. No, I shouldn't say that. It was going into the later 80s, but some of these other artists kept going into the 90s even. And Whitney was one of them. The first I ever heard of Whitney was when she was modeling, and she actually started as a model. And this was around 1980, I would say, 1981. I was a freshman in high school, and I remember seeing her, and I was like drawn to her because she was really pretty. But she was pretty in a rather unconventional way, I would say. She had this preppy clothing, but she had this certain beauty, and she was just like really wholesome looking, you know what I mean? And she was always a stunning woman, so don't get me wrong. She never wasn't beautiful, but in those days, she was a lot more innocent. I think it's fair to say. She didn't have a lot of the baggage that would accompany her later on, and so she had that cute side to her. And even when she first became a popular singer, and this was around 1985 and 86, she did come across as elegant and rather, I would say, rather wholesome. And the reason I'm stressing this is that several years later, this might have actually been in the early 90s. I don't know when she got with Bobby Brown. I really don't. And when she had her daughter. So, I mean, this might have been even before then. But I remember seeing an interview with her and being struck by how rough around the edges she sounded, because I don't know if I had, I'm pretty sure I had heard her speak like before then. I don't know if I, heard too many interviews with her, but she just had this very kind of like coarse way of talking. And I mean, she was born in Newark, New Jersey. I don't know if she grew up there, but it was like kind of like I think I actually had the same experience with Beyonce, because they have this very polished, refined image. So you know how like you see somebody and they look a certain way and then they open their mouth and it's like totally different. It was kind of like one of those deals. And um anyway, it's not really surprising. I think it was also mannerism. So it's possible that that something changed within her, or she actually became more of who she really was. Because when I look at her astrology, Her sun is in Leo, her moon is in Aries, and they form a trine. They're close enough, but they're both fire energies. And she had Pisces rising. I actually found out about this not too long ago, and it just made total sense. Then everything made total sense, because your rising sign is your calling card. It's how you project yourself. But I have said before that I believe it's most influential during the first, 30 years of your life. And there was something that I read that really spoke on this, and I don't want to talk too much about, because I don't I would just be like guessing why they said that. I believe it has to do with the first Saturn return, but I'm not quite sure. I think because the first Saturn return really is when you break away from from the influence of your family of origin. So when people have Pisces rising, it can give kind of a hint at something in the home life of that person that may have been not that pleasant. Now, some of you who have Pisces rising, who will claim to have happy childhoods, I'm perfectly willing to retract that statement. Maybe I'm incorrect about that, but especially when the fire energy is in the sun and even the moon signs, I feel like the person, there's almost like this victimization when they're young, and then it's like they realize it somehow, and it pisses them off. It's like they get, how sometimes a person, like let's say a woman is beaten by her husband, not to pick on men, but just somebody who is just like this kind of a doormat for their partner, and then she decides she's finished with it. Something changes within her, and she decides she's going to leave that situation. Then it's almost like it becomes wildfire, where the person just won't tolerate anything from anyone, and they're becoming self-empowered, obviously, but it's almost like over doing it in the other direction, because they feel like they were kept down for so long. So it might be something like that, and her relationship with Bobby might have been that kind of rebellion that she couldn't really express, didn't feel safe to express early on. Why don't people feel safe to express themselves early on? Physical threat of physical abuse, having a strong love for their parents and not wanting to upset them, or if not a strong love, then a very deeply developed sense of guilt that they're going to destroy somebody, and not wanting that. But something, you know what I mean? And so I'm just going to go through some of these other things that she had. She had the moon in Virgo. I'm sorry, she had the moon in Aries, the sun in Leo, Mercury in Virgo, Venus in Leo, Mars in Libra, and Pisces rising. Okay. So there was a rumor that this woman named Robin, that was her friend or something like that, was her lover. And this was, while she was alive. And I remember I used to read tabloids religiously, and they would always say that, And I thought to myself at the time, oh, well, because there were other people that had similar things. I can't remember offhand, but famous people that had a so-called roommate, or somebody where you're like, yeah, right, sure. Like that isn't their lover. Now, why would somebody like Whitney, who was becoming famous in the last half of the 80s and the 90s, have to hide something like that? Well, very easy. It wasn't socially acceptable as it is these days. Now, I made a comment on another video where I said that being gay is almost hip, and somebody took offense to that initially because they said it's not a choice. It's it's what the person is born with. And that person misunderstood me because I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean that somebody is just doing it to be cool. I meant that it is considered cool, that you're not going to be rejected a lot of times for being gay anymore. You actually might even be considered more, cutting edge or something. And I'm, half joking, but what I'm saying is that times have radically changed. There might be, of course, there's pockets of the United States. There's definitely places in the world where things are not as progressive, if you want to call it that. But overall, like in the 80s, it wasn't. I mean, Elton John married a woman in the early 80s, for God's sake. And I think he had already come out as bisexual. So it was really, I mean, it takes some people a longer time to admit who they are. It's not that they don't know. I don't think a lot of times it's that they can't bring themselves to disappoint people, hurt someone, or just the whole public if they're afraid of the backlash and they're afraid they're going to destroy their career. So, and being pigeonholed. If Whitney Houston had male admirers, would they still be attracted to her? I don't know. It's a very interesting question, but it's possible she was bisexual. Um, she might have been with Bobby um, because she really was in love with him, but it might have been that he was her friend. It doesn't really matter what her total sexuality was about, but the part of her loving women, she may have felt that that was going to be totally not accepted. She came from a religious family, and that kind of environment, that church experience frowns on being gay. And nowadays I see, like, if I'm walking down the street, I'll see like churches, Christian churches, that will, have a rainbow flag, and they're very pro-gay. They're trying to, give out the message that they're not discriminating against anyone coming to their services, and maybe even catering or encouraging that community to come to their churches too. But I live in a certain area and some other people don't, and that would, so even today I'm talking about. So um, what I think happened to Whitney is that she probably felt like she couldn't be who she really was 100%. And for somebody who is a double fire sign, sun and moon, that can really kill them. And I'm not talking literally, but spirit, not spiritually, but kill their spirit. So she did get involved in drugs. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was one reason why, because she felt this sense of who she really was, that she had to, you know, have a front up, and she couldn't, and she had to, like, have some things that she couldn't share. So she has a lot of masculine energy, and the masculine energy is very rebellious, especially the fire, I would say. Mars in Libra, that's a tough position for Mars, because Mars is the god of war and Libra is the peacemaker. And Libra is the opposite sign of the ruler of Mars, which is Aries. It co-rules Scorpio, but for our intents and purposes here. And the Leo person is very proud. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a innate sense of dignity. And yet her rising sign was Pisces, and that can be low self-esteem. That can be somebody who doesn't feel good about themselves, who doesn't feel confident. And Leo can be very confident. And you can see, looking at the aspects table, that her sun squared off to Neptune. And also Venus squared off to Neptune. So that speaks to identity issues with Sun squaring Neptune, and with Venus squaring Neptune, relationship issues. Being very, falling in love with the wrong people. And that's kind of like that Venus and Pisces complex on the negative side of being quite the person who's sacrificial in love and being deluded by love. In her chart, she had Chiron in the first house. Oh boy. And it's in conjunction with the ascendant. So she had that Piscean. That's why I think I was attracted to her in her earlier days as a model, because I think that's when I said she had this wholesome, the Pisces rising can give that very like feminine type of energy or appearance, but almost like this vulnerable quality. Also, Neptune rules, so her ruler was Neptune. Well, you have to, drugs are something you should stay the hell away from if you have a prominent Pisces or you're ruled by Neptune, because escapism is going to be a theme in the person's life. They're going to really feel that it's hard to accept life in its, warts and all, where it's not all fun and games. The Piscean experience, the drug experience, the ecstasy, is really about the ecstasy of merging with God. And so it's like a drug addict who longs to have that transcendental experience. And she, having Neptune in the 8th house, the person may be very open to the other side, if you will. But there are some disincarnate entities that are not very good, and especially if you're taking mind-altering substances, they can hijack the person. And so that's one of the reasons why getting intoxicated or under the influence on anything is going to put you at risk. And we're not just talking about physically, but energetically. It's almost like a possession. And, when you see somebody who drinks and they just seem like they're crazy, that's like, you almost think that person got possessed by demons. But that can, go across the board. Any kind of mind-altering substance can leave a person open to those negative energetic attachments. And they can feed off of that person. And, so that they kind of lose their bearings, if you will. And she had, so she had this conjunction in her first house, and so she's ruled by Neptune. Neptune rules photography, so it's no surprise that the camera loved her and that she was able to make her initial living from modeling. because that's just how Neptune influences. And on the ascendant, it's going to be, to have Chiron on the ascendant, it's going to give a fragile quality to the person that will be readily available to those people who are perceptive enough to pick up on it. Chiron in the first is the pain from not being accepted as who the person really is. But it's paradoxical, I feel, because in some cases the person who has this placement may be reluctant to really show who they are to other people because they don't want that kind of scrutiny or possible rejection or criticism. But it can show that the person is very sensitive to their own sense of self, their own, even their own appearance. Although I don't know of any talk about Whitney not being happy with how she looked, or doing anything like getting her nose fixed or bleaching her skin like Michael Jackson did, or I don't know, there's some, I don't want to say somebody else who I think might have done that because I don't know for sure, but we know Michael Jackson did. They did give other reasons why. Well, they said he had vitiligo and stuff, but I mean, I mean, there's just other things that suggest that he was altering his appearance. And I feel like, yeah, I'm going to have to definitely do Michael Jackson because he had a very strong Piscean influence himself. And really, when, Pisces can be very distorted, the person can have a hard time with what they see in the mirror. I just did a video on body dysmorphia, and I think I mentioned Pisces rising. But I never heard about Whitney Houston having an eating disorder or anything like that. So I don't even know, or getting plastic surgery. So I'm not sure. She might have, but I don't know of it personally. I do think that she was just very sensitive as far as her own feelings about herself were. Maybe due to having the success that she did, she was able to overcome that, which would be nice. But it still shows up here. And, so maybe she felt like she was living a lie. She couldn't, bring her so-called friend, who might have been her partner, home to meet the family. Or, I'm sure her family knew Robin, but just, have her be a part of her life to that extent. And that might have made her sad. Oh, and it's funny, I was focusing so much on Chiron, I didn't notice that her sun is in the first house, along with Jupiter. And no doubt she was a lucky person to be able to have certain things happen. She was discovered as a model. Somebody saw her singing with her mother and then signed her up for a modeling contract. So these kinds of situations where somebody gets discovered and stuff, you could call that luck. I'm sure it's destiny, but I mean, it is something that seems happenstance. It doesn't seem like it happened like necessarily through her direct effort. So that's what we might call luck. But in any case, the moon in the first house, that makes a person very sensitive. It is in Aries, so it's going to kind of balance out in that sense, but there still is that sense of being vulnerable. And then, like, in her fifth house, she has Cancer. I'm sorry, the North Node in Cancer. North Node is a soul's mission, and she definitely had that mission that is, the fifth house can be creativity and, the artistic self-expression. So it certainly goes along with that. In the sixth house, the house of work, service to others, she had her sun there, and it was actually in conjunction with Venus here. So this really indicates when somebody has a sun in the sixth house, it can indicate that they really are, that they have a very good work ethic, because their way of perceiving work is very positive. So they're just interested in being productive, and it's not, I mean, it's funny because we normally think of the sun as the ego, but in this case, it can just be that the person has, their identity can be tied up in being a worker. Not necessarily a certain type of work. That's more of the 10th house, I feel. And so with the conjunction with Venus, this makes a person artistic, but also in the sixth house, Venus here can indicate the type of work a person is doing in the arts. Uranus is here, so that can indicate somebody whose hours are their own, so it's basically somebody who works for themselves. In the seventh house, she had Mars, Pluto, and Mercury. So she had a conjunction between Mercury and Pluto. I wonder if that is indicative of addictive personalities, because this would be the conjunction of an obsession, so a mental obsession. And I feel like addictions, like substance abuse, is a form of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where the person has a very like a fixation on something, and they feel compelled to use, for instance. And the other thing, that with Pluto itself, it can indicate in the seventh house, this is the house of committed partnership, that the person attracts controlling partners. There was talk about Bobby Brown, who's zooming who, who's controlling whom. And so, so Pluto in the seventh, now she could have been the controlling one. I mean, the person can be the controlling one, but I tend to see it as attracting that type of person. Mars is here. Mars in the seventh, to me, can be the person who attracts fiery characters. What is Bobby Brown's sign? I thought he was an Aquarius. I think he was, or is. He's still alive. Yes, I looked it up. He was or he is. Why do I keep saying was? He is an Aquarius. And Bobby was born in 1969. Whitney was born in 1963. So she was the older woman. So that's very interesting. So the point is that because Whitney had the moon in Aries, I feel like this is one of the things that Aries people have to really pay attention to, is being attracted to relationships that are very contentious and thinking that they have this great relationship. I think that this happens a lot because the person is very fiery and they might be kind of combative. And a relationship that's really functional, that's very like grounded and peaceful, might be misinterpreted as something that is undesirable because these types of people have such a drama-filled mentality. So they may find that, if they're constantly fighting with somebody, I don't know, did they fight physically? I thought they had something going on physically, but let's leave that alone. Let's just talk about bickering and stuff like that. They might think that that's that they've met their match and that's their perfect partner. Now, again, that's distorted thinking, but that is, I mean, she has a square between Venus and Neptune, so she might have distortions when it comes to love. In the 8th house, I already talked about Neptune. Just to add a few things about Neptune. One thing to say about the 7th house, too, is that it can be something to do with the public, relations, publicity. With Mars here, I think one thing is, shooting straight to the top. They were saying something about Aries, that Moon in Aries can be like that as well. Some interpretation I saw, but I don't know, because Aries is just very. It's the first sign, for one thing, and it's very aggressive. It's very ambitious, but it almost made it sound like the shooting star kind of thing. So maybe being ruled by Mars, the first house of the self. Yeah, that's probably why, because the sun is exalted in the first, and the sun is that, when we think of fame and things like that. So maybe that has that connection with Aries. And so with Neptune in the 8th house, anybody out there who has Neptune in the 8th house, be very careful about taking drugs. And yes, it can be, like I have Neptune in the 6th house, and they talk about, regular, not, not like drugs that make you intoxicated, but just any kind of medicine. You have to be careful and maybe stick to natural medicine. I'm just saying, I think I read that about the 6th house because it's like Virgo and natural earth. So I could be wrong about that. I just remember that they were, telling people to exercise caution with drugs when you have Neptune in the 6th house, but because you might be like more sensitive to them. In the 8th house, this is more on the level of entities being attached to the person, and that's a doorway for that to happen. And just in general, the person may be easily hypnotizable, easily able, maybe just naturally attuned to the supernatural, and able to communicate with spirits. But, some people use Ouija boards, and that can create entity attachments, or, like I said, drugs, and even psychedelic drugs that people are using supposedly for spiritual purposes. Definitely, look into that. I personally don't think that that's necessarily the answer, because you're still taking something and it's outside of yourself. So it can give the person the impression that in order to attain those states of realization, they need something. And I'm not saying that it's totally bad or anything like that. I just think that there's so much emphasis on, oh yeah, this is great, that it doesn't take into account when it's not so great. And yeah, so this person is very open to these other forces, but it's almost like this lack of any kind of boundaries, and you know, so it can just be like this open channel, if you will. I have a whole video on that if you have this placement or you're interested in more information. But like I said, it can be like it can explain how the person dies, and it can be from drugs, like a drug overdose, or maybe drowning, but also under mysterious circumstances. And I definitely think, and also too, the eighth house, because of Pluto, the underworld, I really believe that some of these deaths of famous people are being done by, let's say, undercover individuals. So the eighth house is a house of conspiracy theories, by the way, or conspiracy realities. In the 12th house, she had Saturn. And, you know, it's interesting because the 12th house are hidden enemies. And like I just had kind of intimated about the 8th house, if the person has hidden enemies, maybe they're of a karmic nature, that this goes back to other lifetimes. And the person, it's like, you know what came into my mind, which was really funny, making a deal with the devil. And I'm not saying that Whitney did this necessarily, but I'm trying to trust my intuition more and just like say what comes up in my mind without analyzing it first. And it's interesting because Saturn in the tarot is connected to the devil card. So in the 12th house, you know, Saturn is the lord of karma. And I don't know, it just seems to me like it's very interesting that there is some yeah, and she had a square between Saturn and Neptune. So there was like a tense angle between that 8th and 12th house, those houses. And it's interesting because Saturn can be the father. And her father, you know, we didn't hear much about her father. And I looked up her father, and I guess before he passed away before she did. And he was, I think, suing her or something, saying that she promised she was going to use him for something, and then it didn't happen, and blah, blah, blah. So I don't know, you know, if that was a real sad thing for her in her life, you know, her relationship with her father, you know, before that incident. But Saturn in the 12th house is like, this person may feel like they have this karmic debt or this karmic burden. There may be this feeling of the world being against them. Now, with Whitney Houston, it almost seems absurd, right? Because she had such a illustrious career. But look how she deteriorated. So obviously that wasn't enough. And, you know, I suspect that she was, or maybe I read somewhere that she was using drugs before I thought that she was, before she even met Bobby Brown. I think that's one of the reasons why they brought that up and saying, because they were blaming him for it and saying, oh no, she was using it before then. You know, please forgive me if I'm wrong about that. But, you know, it wouldn't be a shocker because of the business that she was in that was very, you know, saturated with drugs. And so the point is that in addition to having, you know, because the 12th house is Pisces house, and because she has Pisces rising, she already had this kind of maybe a story that she told herself where she felt victimized in some way, and we don't know. I mean, sometimes things happen to these people that we have no way of knowing because it was very well hidden. And it might be this albatross that was around her neck that she really couldn't come to terms with. Saturn can be this sense of some kind of an obstacle or burden, but there is an element of the victim or and maybe even coming from another lifetime, since Saturn is connected to karma and the 12th house is karmic. Yeah, so I was saying karmic debt or something like that. And the only reason that I even talk about karmic debts, because I'm not of the belief that karma is something that we have to, like, totally exhaust. I don't think that we can. I think we're always creating new karma, but it's more of a state of consciousness that the person, they're acting from a higher octave, if you will. And so it's like they don't create karma even when they do things, because they're not doing it for, it's like it's not what you do, it's why you're doing it, or that kind of thing. And so because she was not growing, because she was becoming more and more heavily involved with drugs, she was almost devolving in a sense. Although it's all good, it all will add information to the soul's journey. But because of those things, she didn't have that sense of utilizing Saturn in a way that might have freed her from her past karma that was following her around, kind of like a ball and chain. So I think that that's why we say these kind of deaths are tragic. Even if she was murdered, she still was in a very vulnerable state. And I want to end this reading with this. I started this reading, but I didn't really explain why I looked up what her rising sign was, because I saw. I told you that she was acting very coarse in this one video that I saw, like rough around the edges. But then I saw a video, and I guess it was towards the end of her life, and she was very fragile and vulnerable, and it was like showing this other side. And this was when she was ravaged by drugs. And I looked up her rising sign, and I immediately knew, when it was Pisces, that this was the original Whitney. This was the little girl and the young woman who, in a sense, got hardened probably by the industry. And because she had that fire energy, for a while she could kind of, or you could say the masculine energy altogether, she could kind of, make herself convinced that she was tough enough to handle it and tough enough to do drugs, and it was going to be okay. But then she, the fire can burn out. So even regardless of the way that she died, she was on the wrong path. We know that. And it's it's interesting too, because I know she died during February of 2012, and I see that her 12th house has a lot of Aquarius in it. So she actually died with the sun in the 12th house. And yeah. So, and that's where Bobby's son is. I usually don't talk about things like that, but I just, he was born in February too. So very karmic time for her, I guess. Okay, well, that's what I have for you. I hope that you enjoyed this. If you would like a private reading, I'm at Rain and Moon Astrology. The link is below. Take care. Bye.